The room fell silent, so quiet. Amara King could hear the faint hum of the overhead lights. The Russian official's words still hung in the air. Laced with arrogance and contempt, he had leaned back in his chair, smirking at his colleagues, convinced that his in Russian had gone unnoticed by the one it targeted. But Amara had heard every syllable. She stood slowly. Her calm eyes met his across the long table. "That's a bold conclusion," she said, her voice even but strong. Then, in flawless Russian, she continued, especially from a man quoting half-truths, while ignoring the wisdom of Mikhail Lemon, who once said, "Mathematics should be the servant of reason, not its master. You've let your systems become blind to their own weaknesses." Silence. The Russian delegates stiffened. The official's face turned a shade paler. No one moved. Amara didn't flinch. She reached into the folder before her, retrieved a document, and placed it gently on the table. "Page 14 of your proposal," she continued in Russian. "Your system's flaw lies here. You've opened a door even you didn't realize." Her American colleagues stared in disbelief. The Russian team scrambled to glance at each other, realizing what had just happened. Amara sat down quietly. In that moment, everything shifted. The power in the room, the very balance of it had tilted. But who was this woman? How had she known? And how did she learn to wield her brilliance like a blade wrapped in silk? To understand, we have to go back to the beginning, to the girl no one noticed, who was preparing for this moment her entire life, and the question that echoes now. What happens when the one person they underestimated becomes the one person they can't ignore? Amara King had always been invisible till she wasn't. Born in Atlanta to a single mother who worked double shifts as a nurse, Amara grew up surrounded by the quiet resilience of women who endured, who adapted. Her mother didn't have much, but she gave Amara the most valuable gift: belief. Belief that her daughter's mind was a weapon, and the world, however cold or unjust, was hers to navigate, not fear. But Amara's life took an unexpected turn when her mother began working for a wealthy Russian family in the city. They couldn't afford childcare for Amara, so she often spent afternoons at their mansion, shadowing her mother. That's where she met Irina, the family's elderly nanny. Irina spoke little English, but her warmth transcended language. She took a liking to Amara and began teaching her Russian, bit by bit through lullabies, old books, and long conversations over tea. By the age of 12, Amara was reading Russian poetry by 16. She was translating novels at 18. She earned a full scholarship to Georgetown University, double majoring in linguistics and computer science. It was there that her professors began to notice something rare. Amara didn't just learn languages. She absorbed them. She understood their rhythms, their history, the power they held. After graduation, she was recruited by the CIA's Elite Language and Signals Intelligence Division. She spent years in silence, behind closed doors, unraveling code, analyzing foreign cyber operations, and mastering dialects that others found impossible. But it wasn't just languages that fascinated her, it was systems. How people built them, how people trusted them, and how, sometimes, people became blind to their own creations. She became a cybersecurity strategist, not just behind a screen, but in rooms where national security was at stake. Yet despite her brilliance, when the White House selected the team for the upcoming USA-Russia Cybersecurity Summit, Amara wasn't first on the list. In fact, she wasn't even on the list. It was Ambassador William Pierce, a grizzled veteran diplomat who had quietly observed her work over the years, who insisted she be added. "This summit isn't just about systems," Pierce had said. "It's about understanding the minds behind them. She's the only one who can see what we're not seeing." Still, when Amara arrived at the summit, she knew what they saw: a young black woman, too young, too inexperienced, flanked by 4 senior white male diplomats in dark suits. The Russian delegation barely concealed their amusement. They weren't ready. But Amara was. She had been preparing, not just in classrooms and strategy rooms, but in the shadows of every conversation where she had been dismissed. Every room where she had to prove herself twice as hard. What they didn't know was she had already read their entire proposal. She had already found the flaw, and the moment to reveal it was approaching. The summit was held in Geneva. In a grand hall draped with history, portraits of world leaders lined the walls, and the heavy oak table seemed built not for conversation, but for war by words. Amara walked in behind Ambassador Pierce and the rest of the U.S. delegation. She wore a simple navy blue suit, her hair in a tight bun, a silver pin on her lapel, the only shimmer in her outfit. She carried no briefcase, no laptop, just a slim black folder and a gaze that missed nothing. From the start, the Russian delegation made their intentions clear. They ignored her, introduced themselves to every member of the U.S. team except her. When they spoke, it was in Russian, confident that no one on the opposing side would catch their side comments. Who brings a secretary to a summit? One whispered with a smirk. Maybe she's here to take notes, another replied. Amara kept her eyes on her folder, but her mind absorbed every word, every inflection. The first day of discussions was intense. Topics ranged from cyber warfare ethics to shared digital infrastructure. But every time a technical question was posed, it was directed to the older men on her team. Ambassador Pierce attempted to bring her in. Ms. King has a unique perspective on this issue, he said during one session. The Russian lead, a cold-eyed official named Viktor Malenkov, waved it off. We prefer to hear from your senior experts, he said, without looking at her. Amara said nothing. Not yet. She watched, listened, and noted how page 14 of the Russian proposal outlined a data-sharing mechanism that seemed secure but wasn't. The flaw was subtle, buried in jargon, but it opened the door to a back vulnerability, one that could allow unauthorized data extraction in a multi-network exchange. That night, Amara stayed awake, studying. She printed the proposal, marked it in red, and pulled an old book from her bag, a Russian philosophy text Irina once gave her, worn at the edges. Inside was a quote she had memorized years ago, one that echoed in her mind now. He who underestimates his opponent has already lost half the battle. Day 2 arrived. Amara sat quietly as Malenkov and his team pushed a proposal that would place Russian-built cybersecurity infrastructure in key U.S. satellite systems. Her teammates hesitated. The Russians pressed. Do you lack the technical courage to innovate? One of them challenged. And then Malenkov leaned forward, smirked, and said in Russian, Let the girl speak. Perhaps she knows what a firewall is. Laughter from his team. That was the moment, the turning point. Amara looked up. Her eyes met Malenkov's with steel. She rose from her chairs, and she began to speak in flawless Russian, her tone calm, controlled. You think I do not understand, but I understand more than you know. You've built a system on arrogance, not security. You've exposed your own flank and you don't even see it. She walked to the head of the table, opened her folder, and placed the marked proposal down. Here, page 14. Your design contains a recursive loop vulnerability. If implemented, it wouldn't protect your interests. It would compromise them. Malenkov froze. Amara continued. And as for my credentials, I learned your language from someone who respected it, not weaponized it. I've worked in the very rooms where your cyber operations were dissected. You mistook silence for ignorance. That was your first mistake. The Russian delegation was stunned. Her American colleagues sat in stunned silence. Then Ambassador Pierce smiled, just a little. In that moment, Amara King stopped being the girl in the room. She became the force they couldn't ignore. For a full 10 seconds, no one moved. Malenkov's smirk was gone, replaced by something else. Shock, embarrassment, fear. Amara stood her ground. She had spoken their language, dismantled their proposal, and exposed their arrogance without raising her voice, without a trace of anger. Behind her, one of the younger Russian aides fumbled to turn to page 14. His eyes widened as he traced the floor sheet. Revealed? Malenkov glanced at him, then at the other Russian officials. His authority, once so absolute, was fracturing. Amara didn't sit down. She let the silence stretch, commanding it. Then she said, again in Russian, "Shall we continue this conversation with mutual respect? Or shall we continue to pretend?" It was not a threat. It was a choice. And it was her choice to offer. Ambassador Pierce finally spoke. His voice was measured, but laced with pride. "Ms. King has just shown the seriousness of this. Summited the stakes for both sides. I suggest we take a short recess." The Americans stood. The Russians hesitated, then followed. As they exited into the hall, Pierce leaned toward Amara. "You just flipped the board," he said quietly. She nodded. "Now they have to play the game our way." In the private lounge, the U.S. team crowded around her. "Why didn't you tell us you spoke Russian like that?" one of the senior diplomats asked, clearly stunned. Amara shrugged. "I didn't think it mattered until it did." The senior diplomat shook his head. "You don't understand. You didn't just win an argument in there. You shifted the leverage of the entire summit." For Amara, it wasn't about leverage. It was about dignity. Her whole life, she had walked into rooms where she wasn't seen. She had learned early that power often came quietly, in knowing more than they expected, in being more than they were ready for. She thought of her mother, of Irina, of the long nights she spent alone in data labs, training her mind, sharpening her skills, not to impress, but to be ready. Now, that readiness had changed the course of international negotiations. The final session resumed, and this time, everything was different. Malenkov didn't speak first. Instead, a different Russian official addressed Amara directly. In English, respectful, careful. "We acknowledge the concerns raised by Ms. King," he said, "and we are prepared to revisit our proposal, collaboratively." No snide remarks. No whispers. The power in the room had realigned. Amara took her seat, opened her folder again, and calmly said, "Then let's begin." And so, for the first time in her career and, perhaps in the summit's history, a young black woman led the conversation in a room designed to silence her, and no one interrupted her again. The summit ended 2 days later, but the ripples of what happened that day would carry far beyond the gilded walls of Geneva. For Amara King, it was never about headlines or recognition. But word got out. Someone had leaked video footage, a short clip showing Amara standing, speaking Russian with precision and grace, while the Russian officials sat in stunned silence. It went viral, not just in diplomatic circles, but across the world. The world saw what that room had seen: power without arrogance, intelligence without ego, courage without anger. Back in Washington, Amara received a quiet message from the CIA official who had once doubted her ability to work in high-stakes diplomacy. It read simply, "I underestimated you. I won't make that mistake again." But the message that meant the most came from her mother, who watched the summit replay on a cracked laptop in their modest Atlanta home. "I see you, baby. And now they do too." Weeks later, at a closed-door debrief, Amara was asked to speak to a new cohort of cybersecurity eager minds who had heard the story of what she did. One of them, a young black woman with bright eyes, asked her a question. "How did you stay calm when they tried to humiliate you?" Amara paused, then replied, "Because I knew who I was long before I walked into that room, and I didn't need their respect to have value, but I earned it anyway." In the months that followed, Amara was offered promotions, awards, and speaking engagements, but she turned most of them down. Instead, she returned to mentorship. creating a program to train young women of color in cybersecurity, diplomacy, and languages, equipping them to walk into rooms like that summit and own their voice. She named the program Arena in honor of the woman who had first taught her the language that helped change the world. And as for the Russian delegation, their proposal was withdrawn, rewritten, when the final deal was signed. It bore the fingerprints of Amara's strategy, a quiet testament to her influence, never mentioned in official documents, but understood by all who were there. In the end, it wasn't just about cyber systems, or politics, or diplomacy. It was about one moment where a woman, underestimated and overlooked, stood tall and reclaimed the space she was always meant to have. Amara King didn't just speak truth to power, she became power, and the world listened. If you were inspired by Amara's powerful story, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and drop a comment below. Let me know your thoughts, or who you'd like to hear about next. Thanks for watching, and remember, never underestimate the power of quiet strength.